All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is a channel that is trying to educate the public on different aspects of important theories of everything that I've studied over the years and come in contact with fortuitously, and a lot of these things are rather obscure and usually pretty esoteric as well. Today is our 394th video on the reciprocal system of theory from Dewey B. Larson. And this theory is a system of theory, meaning that if you understand the system, you can potentially use it yourself to answer any question, come up with solutions to any problem that you see out there. But you really have to know how to use the system and be able to, kind of see through, kind of have it mastered to the point where you can see how it applies. And Mr. Larson was able to do that, and he showed how he was able to do that through his first his two fundamental postulates that he put out in 1959, and then taking those two fundamental postulates and from them deriving a theoretical universe. And so that is precisely what Larson did, is he used his system of theory to derive a theoretical universe. And then in his books, he compared his theoretical universe with the empirical universe that had been measured, compiled into tables from the legacy scientists over the course of the centuries. We're talking about, millions of man hours and trillions of dollars to put together these scientific tables over the centuries. And Larson is able to recreate them strictly from theory. No laboratories, no telescopes, no atom smashers, not even a calculator, because he was doing a lot of the work with a slide rule. So, probably in these later years he had access to a calculator. But anyway, it's an impressive feat, and he's able to come very, very close to the values in these tables strictly from theory. So basically, what is the theory? The theory, stated again in the two fundamental postulates, primarily in the first postulate. And the first postulate goes that the universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. And that is kind of just one version of the first postulate. He changed some of the wording from time to time, and I believe when he first put out the first fundamental postulate, he, instead of using the term motion, he used the term space-time. Later in his life, he paraphrased it as change in 3 dimensions rather than motion. So, but more or less, Larson's universe is a universe of motion. The universe is not made out of matter. It's not made out of energy. It's not made out of force or any, of the fundamental forces or anything like that. It's made out of motion. And in particular, it is made out of what Larson refers to as a scalar motion. This is a kind of more generalized and really non-local, non-directional motion. A scalar motion is a motion that has a magnitude, but it has no specific direction. And you visualize that using a balloon with dots on it. If you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other. That is what Larson calls an outward scalar motion. They are all moving apart, moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. Each dot is moving away from each other dot. And in fact, the locations between the dots are moving away. Each one of those is moving away from each other location, even between the dots. It is the steady expansion of the surface of the balloon. Everything is moving apart. And the further apart they are, the faster they're moving apart from each other. So that is a scalar motion. And you can think of this in terms of time also. Time is always getting later and later and later and later. It's not getting later in any specific direction. So we have time getting later and later and later, space getting farther and farther and farther apart. And again, in motion, space and time are the constituents of motion. Now, back 3,000 years ago, for the last 3,000 years, it's always kind of been thought that space and time are the container of the universe. That the universe is all the world is a stage, and the activities of the players on the stage occur in this container of space and time. But in Larson's formulation, the space and time are the contents, not the container, the contents of the universe. The universe is made out of space and time, together in motion. Space and time do not exist separately, only through abstraction, which is basically kind of like turning off the universe and taking a snapshot. You can abstract, and you can take time and space apart from each other, but in doing so, you are automatically creating a distortion, or you're stopping the universe from its motion. And so what you're seeing is not the live universe. It's kind of like you have to kill the universe first before you can make that snapshot. Same thing with the scalar motion. In order to really determine the direction of a scalar motion, you have to, say if you go back to the dots on the balloon, you have to decide arbitrarily that one of the dots is going to be the reference point, and it's going to be assigned to be motionless. And then once you decide that one of these reference points is motionless, then you can determine the directions from the other dots. And that's basically, again, like killing the universe in order to measure it. It's kind of like also, dissecting, biologically dissecting a frog or something like that. Well, who's to say that what's going on inside the frog when you dissect it is the same as what it is when it was alive? There's a disconnect there, and you have to kind of decide that, okay, well, this disconnect is not relevant, or it's minor. What's going on inside the frog is fundamentally the same when it's alive as when it is dissected. That's an assumption. And that's kind of how I think of the, abstracting space and time and determining the directions of a scalar motion, which is not a property of the scalar motion itself. It's a property of the reference point that you chose. So anyway, space and time do not exist in and of themselves. They only exist together in motion. Motion is a fraction with time or space as the numerator and space or time as the denominator. All of our basic fundamental quantities, including mass, energy, and force, are simply different kinds of motion. In Larson's formulation, speed is space over time. The car is moving 15 miles per hour. Energy is time over space. It took me 3 hours to move that thing 1 mile. And then we also have, force being time over space to the second power. Matter, time to the third power over space to the third power. And so on like that. Larson was able to determine these things through theory, through deduction. And then also, because time and space are reciprocals of one another, they have the same qualities, only with the roles of space and time reversed. They have both a three-dimensional aspect. We observe a three-dimensional aspect of space, x, y, z coordinates, in that space and time as a setting, three-dimensional stationary frame, and thereby Larson is able to extrapolate and say that time also has this three-dimensional aspect, which Larson refers to as coordinate space and coordinate time. Now, in terms of scalar motion, it requires 3 dimensions of space and or 3 dimensions of time just to represent 1 dimension of scalar motion. So there are 2 other dimensions of scalar motion that cannot be properly represented in a reference system. Then space and time also come in only discrete units. There is a minimum unit of space, a minimum unit of time, and really a minimum unit of motion that you have to have before you have those things. And that is what Larson calls unit speed. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, which is also known as the speed of light. And so the speed of light in Larson's universe is 1, and it is the one that is really at the center of a reciprocal system. And so in Larson's universe, the speed of light is the background speed, the speed where it always exists. It's omnipresent. If you have nothing in Larson's universe, you still have the speed of light moving outward in all directions. Scalar motion at the speed of light. That is the 0 point of Larson's universe, or the neutral point, or the null point, or the origin, or the ether of this universe. Larson refers to it as the progression of the natural reference system. So that is the reference system. Now, legacy scientists use 0 as their reference point, from 0 motion. But Larson does it from unit speed. And that means that half of the universe is moving faster than the speed of light, which also flies in the face of the legacy scientists who say that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. That is true if you only consider the half of the universe that is moving slower than the speed of light, which Larson refers to as the material sector. But that ignores what Larson calls the cosmic sector, the half that's moving faster than the speed of light. And those two sectors are reciprocals of one another. In the material sector, you have 3 dimensions of space, coordinate space, and you have clock time. The clock is always getting later and later and later. But if you cross that boundary and you move into the cosmic sector, then you go into a realm of 3-dimensional time, coordinate time, and clock space. The clock is always getting later and later and later. So this just shows you how to get started with the reciprocal system. And then if you really kind of master those different dynamics and relationships, then you can start applying it to other subjects, which is what Larson did. Now, today we're doing the 3rd installment of Larson's paper that is called The Fundamentals of Science in the 21st Century. And if you want to get started at the beginning, you want to go back a couple episodes and watch those 2 episodes. Today is the 3rd installment in this paper. He went over a lot of the history of science stuff in the first 2 days. And now I think he's going to get into his own theory and how it will serve as the fundamental of science in the 21st century. Although at this rate, we might get to the 22nd century before people figure this out. Okay, here it goes. As often happens in scientific research, this theoretical advance was an unexpected result of a project aimed at a totally different objective. So this is Larson talking about the development of his own theory. This project begun half a century ago, and this paper was given in 1978, so half a century before that. This project begun half a century ago, attempted to devise a way of calculating physical properties, or at least some of them, from the theory of the chemical composition. In some respects, this is a rather unfavorable subject for investigation. It has had a great deal of attention from previous investigators, and the most promising lines of approach have been rather thoroughly combed over. On the other hand, it is a problem for which an answer certainly exists, since the physical properties of different substances are obviously results of their chemical composition. I started with the concept embodied in the periodic table of the elements. The idea that the principal properties of these elements depend on the 2 variables represented vertically and horizontally in the tables. The first real advance that I made after many false starts was a recognition of the fact that one of these variables assumed both positive and negative values, whereas the other was always positive. Then, after much additional time and effort had been applied, it became evident that there were 3 of these principal variables rather than only 2. While these efforts to establish the form of the mathematical relations were underway, I was also struggling toward an understanding of the meaning of the mathematics. A tie-in to physical reality was necessary if the results were to be conceptually correct. Here again, my first efforts followed conventional lines of thought. The prevailing view was, and still is, that the differences between the properties of the chemical elements are due to variations in the number and arrangement of the subatomic particles of which these elements, atoms, are assumed to be composed. My original course of procedure was directed toward accounting for the mathematical relations on this basis. Continued lack of success forced me to consider other alternatives. One of the possibilities that I eventually visualized was that some of the variability might be due to differences in the motions of the constituent particles rather than to differences in the atomic composition. This approach was likewise unsuccessful, but it did produce some indications that I was on the right track. These indications became stronger when I placed more emphasis on motions and less on composition. Eventually, the idea that some of the variability might be due to differences in the motions was discarded, and it was substituted by the idea that such differences are responsible for all of the variations. This was the first really radical conceptual jump in the development of my thought, and it had some significant consequences. When the variability was ascribed entirely to differences in the motions, the existence of only 3 major variables made it quite clear that the motions must be motions of the atom rather than motions of many atomic constituents. Then, since inherent motion of the atom is almost certainly rotation, the number 3 naturally suggested rotations around the 3 perpendicular axes. The magnitudes of the 3 major variables could then be identified with the speeds of the 3 rotations. On this basis, the entity of which atoms of matter are composed, according to the conclusions reached earlier, is motion, and the atom is simply a combination of motions. The concept of an atom composed of subatomic particles now had to be discarded. With this understanding of the general nature of the atomic structure, the stage was set for the final inductive step of the original project. Among the mathematical expressions that I had derived during the 20 years or more that I had already been working on the project were some interesting expressions relating certain physical properties of the elements directly to their atomic numbers. What I now had to do was to put these expressions in terms of motions. This was another long and often frustrating task. But after several more years in which I examined every possibility that I could think of, plausible or implausible, it finally dawned on me that one of the most intriguing of the mathematical expressions that I had formulated, one that related the interatomic distances of the elements in the solid state to their atomic numbers, could be very easily explained if there were a general reciprocal relation between space and time. If anyone who encounters this idea for the first time finds it rather weird, I can understand their reaction. It struck me that way too. My first impression was that the idea of the reciprocal of space was conceptually absurd. But when I took a closer look at the concept, I could see that it was not so unreasonable after all. The only relation between space and time of which we have any definite knowledge is motion. And in motion, space and time are reciprocally related. So I examined further the consequences of such a relation. I found, much to my surprise, that it led directly to simple and logical solutions for at least half a dozen long-standing problems of physical science. Anyone who has ever done research work will understand that this kind of a breakthrough that we visualize in our most rosy dreams, and of course, it called for the initiation of a full-scale investigation to see just how far this clarification of the physical picture would extend. By the time of my first publication in 1959, I had been able to formulate a set of postulates incorporating the reciprocal concept. I could show that the principal features of the major subdivisions of physical science could be obtained by pure deduction from these postulates, without the aid of any supplementary assumptions or any information from experience. In the years since the initial publication, scientists in all parts of the world have joined in the effort. The scope of the deductive system has been increased to the point where we can predict that it will ultimately achieve the objective that Newtonian science once envisioned. It will encompass the entire physical universe. For those who shudder at the thought of having to subject their scientific beliefs to a complete overhaul, I want to say that even though the new theoretical system rests on a different foundation, in most instances it arrives at the same conclusions as conventional theory. I would estimate that 90% of what now passes for scientific knowledge is incorporated into the new system either just as it stands or with nothing more drastic than a change in the language in which it is expressed. Another 5% or so retains the mathematics in the existing form, but alters the interpretation. Not more than 5% of conventional scientific thought has to undergo any significant change, and these major reconstructions are confined to the far out regions, the realms of the very small, the very large, and the very fast. The same regions in which conventional science is encountering its most serious problems. On first consideration, it may seem strange that totally different basic premises would lead to much the same results in so many cases. There is, however, a very simple explanation. The 90% of present-day science that is incorporated into the new deductive system without significant change is not derived from the general principles invented by Einstein and other modern physicists. It is derived empirically. The theories included in the 90% are the inductive theories of lower rank than the fundamental principles I have been discussing. What the new system of theory does in these areas is to provide a general theoretical basis for the empirically derived relations, something that has never been available before. As I pointed out in the discussion of the Ptolemaic theory, the construction of an inductive theory is impossible if some essential piece of information is missing. When observation and measurement were extended into what I have called the far-out regions, Newtonian science lost the battle to Einstein, and his inventions became the essential piece of information that would have enabled understanding the situation in these far-out regions was not available. We have now identified it. The piece of information that has been missing until now is the reciprocal relation between space and time. By applying this relation, we have been able to construct a new inductive science on a specific and definite basis. Our problem now is to bring this development to the attention of the scientific community. Here we encounter the same obstacle that always faces innovators. Those who take a superficial look at the new development see only the fact that it challenges some popular ideas. They hold up their hands in horror and say, "These people disagree with Einstein. They must be crazy." I have yet to find any law of science that prohibits disagreeing with Einstein. But be that as it may, since this is such a common reaction, let us look at the situation and see just where disagreement lies. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop. That's a really, I thought, good 15 minutes of Larson explaining where he's coming from. And hopefully in the next installment, he will explain it further. You know, if you followed that along, I hope you got something out of it. If not, just keep persevering. This is not easy, but it's worthwhile. And, you know, it never is easy to kind of learn new paradigms, but it always enriches your world. And so I just encourage you not to reject anything out of hand, just like what Larson is saying. There is no scientific prohibition with disagreeing with Einstein or with disagreeing with any of the clowns that are out there today talking about science, like, you know, that little weasel that does and other people like that. So anyway, have a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you